Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to this very nice room, guys. We want today to look at what is the INFJ's relation to the SI cognitive function. And of course, you will have seen from this video title that in the similar vein as the video I made where I argued that INFJs simply don't use NE and also INFJs simply don't use FI. Well, INFJs of course simply don't use the SI function. They don't use the T function, but I haven't yet made a video about that. So why is it that INFJs simply don't use the SI function? I think that often you hear people argue that the SI function is a function that INFJs must use since it is the function of recall. It is the function that allows people to retain facts, and that, of course, if anybody is to retain facts, they have to have SI somewhere, and the fact that INFJs don't have a good memory of facts explains or suggests that indeed SI is not very high up, it's somewhere in the unconscious, and that explains our poor memory of facts, right? So the immediate obstacle that this particular hypothesis encounters is that INFJs in fact have quite a good memory of facts, right? It's not that it's bad, it's that it's selective, right? So the question is, so when I say selective, I mean it's not as expansive as the memory or the recall function of other people, but what it has selected, what is part of the selection, is usually very vivid, more detailed, so in other words, better than the memory of other people, right? What it has selected for concentration is very vivid, but it's more selective. If you like, you could argue that some people have a more democratic memory, they remember a lot of things, but the level of intensity tends to be equal between these things, of course, with exceptions made for particular events that have to do with a particular history of a person. While the memory of other people is more selective in the sense that it's aristocratic, so there's fewer members in that society, there's fewer facts, but these facts have more powers, right? So this is the extent of my analogy. The problem is that saying that INFJs have SI somewhere in their unconscious doesn't help at all to explain the kinds of memory that INFJs have. Because the memory that we're talking about, the memory that is more selective and is more aristocratic in this sense, is perfectly to be explained by reference to, well, first of all, like the cognitive memory function that is orthogonal, doesn't have anything to do with the Jungian cognitive functions, but also with recourse to the NI function. The NI function links past and future in such a way that it reinforces the particular worldview that an INFJ has built for themselves. Okay, so in a sense, an INFJ is always animated by a notion of narrative in how they make sense of their lives. They need to operate with that, otherwise they're kind of not functioning properly. For this notion of narrative, this worldview articulated as narrative to operate, they need to be able to make sense of the past in such a way that it allows them to project themselves into the future. They do that in a very active and vivid way, because you could argue that everybody does that to a degree, but for INFJs this is so important. Like an INFJ who's not able to do that to their heart's content or with a sense of freedom is going to be sad, is going to be depressed, is going to feel completely curtailed in their possibilities. So there's this very active sense of taking out of the past particular bundles of events that can inform the future and show that the worldview the INFJ has chosen for themselves, articulated as a narrative, makes sense and can be validated by them, right? But this means that there's going to be certain facts that are going to be extremely valued from the past that are going to be selected for information of the future. These are the facts that are going to be brought out of the repository of memory by the function of recall, the NI function of recall in this case, right? This has nothing to do with the democratic function SI, which tends to be much more attentive to all facts that are deemed to be relevant in one way or another to the person's life, regardless of whether they take part in a narrative of projection into the future that is very specific and tunnel visioned. SI tends to say, okay, like this particular fact has had some importance, I'm going to retain it. I'm going to be able to bring it out of the repository of memory. Because as we all know, like we remember a hell of a lot more things than we are able to, in fact, recall, that is to say, seize out of that repository of memory and make it, give it agency over our lives. Because in a sense, when we're deciding to take those memories out of the repository, it's because we're going to be allowing them to have influence over what we do, right? And for most SI users, strong SI users, there is this sense that the relevance of those facts and how they're going to influence what we do next is not determined by a particular narrative that is really the special domain of the NI user. This is why Jung is an NI dominant, by the way, because the very story of individuation that he articulates in his books is a perfect example of NI narrativism. You need to have a story of how you move from the past into the future and how you articulate everything through a coherent worldview. INFJs do that all the time. They need to do that, but they don't spend any time being democratic about which facts they remember. And in fact, if they had SI as an unconscious function, well, they would be horrible at doing this. In fact, they would not be able to do this at all, at relating to facts from the past. But they do relate to facts from the past very well. They just happen to be very selective, and this is something that they can do with the NI function. It's not something that we have to posit takes place via the SI function. So, you know, cognitive type, the theory, has been influential in my view in this regard. We have to understand that NI is a function that links past and future. It's not just a function that's oriented to the future. So for the aspect of recall that takes place in our lives as INFJs, NI is sufficient. Okay guys, so that was my view. Don't forget that I have written The Infinite Soul, which is my new book on the INFJ. You can get it at the links below. INFJ Life in the Modern World, How to Be Happy, Leading a Meaningful, Purposeful and Rich Life Today. Of course, my older book, The Ecstatic Soul, which is more of a classic at this point, but if you haven't got it, the prequel and the sequel together, all the links are below. And don't forget, my Patreon page helps a lot to keep things afloat for me from €3 a month. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It's true that when you do this, you're mostly just deciding to support me continue with this channel, but it really helps. Okay guys, see you on Wednesday, and before that in shorts probably. Take care, bye-bye.